So this next section is very short, and as you can see, there's really not a whole lot we cover. It's all about setting up your own custom Git aliases. So there's two things we talk about. One is how we define the aliases and where we put them, which is this global config file. That's normally where we put them. So I'll say, I don't know, it's worth knowing about that even outside of the context of aliases. And then actually writing these aliases is nice to have. Some people really use a lot of aliases. They're like shortcuts, little custom commands you can write, so you don't have to type out full-length Git commands. But other people aren't as crazy about them, so I'd say completely nice to have. But people might argue with me. Some people are very, I don't want to say addicted, but very into their own aliases that they've set up, so much so that they might not even know how to use regular Git commands. They're just so used to, so accustomed to their custom aliases. Anyway, nothing critical. It's a short section and pretty light stuff. It's kind of fun. And if you enjoy working with these aliases, you'll have a lot that you can do after this section. Before we dive into Git aliases, I want to talk about the global config file. We've talked about configuring Git a couple of different times, and there are multiple places we can configure Git. There's actually three. There is the local config file in every single Git repo. We talked about that, I think, one or two sections ago. In the .git directory, there is a file called config. So settings in there apply to one repo, and just that one local repo. Then we have the global git config file, where we can configure settings that will apply across all repos. But there's actually one level above that, which I never use. There's a system-wide config file. If you have multiple users and accounts on one machine, that system-wide config file would apply to all of those users. But I just use one account for the most part, so I configure things globally if I want them to impact all of my repos. So we configured things globally early on using the command line. Git config, and then we do -- global, and then user.name. For example, that's one thing that we set. And then we also did user.email. I'm just retrieving those values, but I could change them from the command line. And when we learn how to make aliases in the next video, I can do that from the command line. I'm just adding a new configuration, or I'm changing a setting. But it's kind of annoying to do it from the command line. For me, at least, I like to see all of my aliases at once. So we can actually open up the config file, the global config file. So where do we look for that? We saw that the local config file lives in the .git folder for every repo. Well, the global config file is called .git config. It's a hidden file, and it's located in the home directory by default. So we can take a look at it. I could just print it out. So it's tilde to reference the home directory, .git config. And this is what I have in it right now. I don't think I've really done a whole lot in this config file. I've set up, really not much. Also, I'll just open it over here. Here we go. So we have things like user, name is called Steele. So I could change that here, or change my email here, and this does the exact same thing that this line did right here if I were to set user.name to be something else. So two interfaces that change the same setting. One from the command line, it actually changes this file right here. So if I run this, you'll see it now has been updated. I didn't change this in the file myself. This command triggered that change, but I'm going to go back to what we had in there, and I'm going to save that. Okay, so there are lots of settings that we can change in here, just like with the local config files. It's kind of overwhelming how many things you can update. Aliases are probably the most important, aside from the basic things like your username and email, as well as setting up your editor. So I did this early on. If you recall, I used VS Code. I set that up. That's what this code is. It's just the name that we use to refer to VS Code, but this could be another editor's name. That's where we tell Git what editor to use by default. And so that's the sort of thing we want to happen globally in all repos. The same goes for setting up these aliases that I'll show you in the next video. We want them to apply across all repos, presumably. I mean, they don't have to. But if you want to use these nice aliases, why not use them everywhere? Anyway, the last thing I'll just remind you of is this weird syntax. So if you want to change username, its user is the entity or the group that we reference in square brackets. You don't have to indent, but everybody does. It makes it clear, this relationship here, that name is nested under user. And then we set name equal to something. From the command line, it's user and then dot some property like name. So it does vary the way that it's set up, or the syntax, but they end up changing the same setting. Anyway, this is our global git config file. In the next video, we will learn how to add some basic aliases to somewhere in this file, and hopefully they're very useful. So let's see how to do that. So now we move on to aliases. So a git alias is just a shortcut. It's a custom command, a name that we can come up with that corresponds to some existing git commands. So instead of typing git status over and over, I could type git s or git stat or git st. I can totally customize it. I can even combine certain commands or add on a bunch of options, things that get really annoying, a bunch of flags, and create a shortcut for that, where instead of typing maybe 100 characters, I might type 2 or 3 characters. So the way that we do this is we work in the global config file, or we set the alias from the command line. But there is no git alias command. Instead, we configure aliases just like we set any other property. So I'll show you a very basic example to begin with. Why don't we do git status? So instead of typing git status like this, I'm in a Git repo right now. Of course, it was not going to work if we're not in one. Well, it will work, but we won't see this sort of output. I don't know why I'm reminding you how git status works. You know that if you run it and you're not in a repo, it says not in a repo. Anyway, if I am tired of typing that, or I type it all the time, which I do, we could set up git s maybe, or st. So if I do it in the config file, I need to work under alias. So alias, square brackets, and then we just follow this syntax. S, if that's what the alias we want to be called, if we want it to be s equals, and then some known git command, like status. Now we don't need to write git status, we can just write status. It assumes the git, because we'll still need to run git s. So if I save this file, and I come over here and I type git s, it works. And if I instead change that to stat pat, I don't know why, but if that's what I want, if I try running git stat pat, there we go. But if I try something else like git that, we don't have that command, but I can fix that. Not that I really would. And I run it, and now it works. It corresponds to git status. It's running git status for us. So I would probably leave that as s or st. We could do another one for git log, and it would just look like this. L equals log. So git L would be the same as git log. Git L, and there we are. Same as git log. And that's the first most basic type of alias we can do, just a shortcut. Just save. I mean, they're all about saving characters, but these are very basic. And we could fill this out with a bunch more. I'm going to show you a second way of setting them from the command line, which some people prefer. And then we'll talk about aliases with arguments. And then I'll show you some aliases that online people have shared that I didn't write, but that I use because they're useful. So I'll show you those as well. So this will be a very quick video. I just want to show that you can also configure these aliases from the command line if you prefer. It's the same exact idea of configuring any of these properties. You can do it in the file, a config file with this syntax, or you can use the dot syntax on the command line. So it would look like this: git config -- global. Then we decide what is the alias we want to configure. Well, it's going to be alias dot something. How about we do a git branch alias. Instead of making it shorter, let's do something silly. So if you type, what is my branch? Or how about show me branches? Show me branches. Let's make that an alias for branch. So git show me branches should be the same as git branch. Very silly. You'll see though, if I try running git show me branches, it actually now does autocomplete for me. It just ran git branch, right? Same output I would see if I did git branch. And if we go to this file, it shows that change. So those aliases I set up, assuming I set them up as a global alias with -- global, they're added to the global config file. Otherwise, if I set them up locally, they'll be in the local config file in a specific repo. So I probably don't want this alias, but I'll leave it for now. In the next video, I'll talk about how we can write aliases that work with arguments. The aliases we've written so far have been simple. There's 3 of them. And we have not worked with any arguments. We haven't passed any additional values to them. For example, when we run git branch, often we'll create a new branch instead of just looking at all branches. If we do git branch and then a branch name, it creates the branch. That would be an argument, a value we're passing to the command. Or git commit. If we do -m, we provide a commit message. So how can I set up an alias? For example, let's say I just want C, or maybe CM for commit with a message. So I could write that alias myself. CM equals commit -m. But then what about the commit message itself? Well, the way that Git aliases are set up, the way they're structured, is that Git will actually take any arguments we pass to whatever our alias is, this command. If we pass something like first commit, for example, it will take that and pass it through here. So it will just append it to the end. So if we have 2 arguments that we pass through, for whatever reason, it wouldn't make sense here, but if we did, Git would pass both of them in that same order. So this makes it really, really easy to define aliases that involve arguments. We can do a lot more complex things. For example, CM, if we want that for commit message, so I wouldn't just do C, because sometimes a lot of the time you need to write full commit messages, open it up in the editor, multiple lines, follow a particular format, a template for your message. So I would do CM as the shortcut for -m. So if I just do that and I save, do I have any changes in here? Let's do our git L, or rather S. I don't have anything to commit, so let's just make a new file. Let's do touch new.js. All right, and then git S again. We can add new.js. We didn't set up an alias for that. And now I can do git CM and then a message like my new commit. All right. Oh, I totally forgot not to use exclamation points in the terminal. And if we take a look, git L for git log, we see my new commit. So we successfully made a new commit using CM. So we could do another example, git add. There's another one, right? We add files. We could just do A equals add. And I can add as many arguments after, file 1, file 2. They all will be included. They'll be passed through. When I do git A, they'll be passed through to git add. So let's try that. Here is the repository I'm working on. Let's just add some changes to this README file and to this JS file and to our package.json. I'm really destroying things. What should we change in here? Maybe a version number? It doesn't matter. I'm just making a lot of changes. Okay. So if I type git s now, instead of status, why not use our new alias? If I want to add 2 of them, the readme and new.js, I can do git a and then readme and new.js. Now this only saves us 2 characters, right? Add is not that long of a command. None of these are saving us a lot, although, it's annoying to do like git commit -m. But I'm going to show you in the next video some more complicated commands or aliases that people like to use that we'll just steal. Well, they're shared for us to use. So we will borrow, but let me just demonstrate this. So git a with these 2 arguments, they both were passed through those 2 values to git add. And if we take a look at our status, both of them are ready to be committed. And now we can do commit with a message, another commit. Yay. And we'll do git L, and there we are, another commit, yay. Okay, so you don't really have to worry about arguments. You don't have to do anything fancy. They're automatically passed through when you define an alias and call it. Okay, so we've seen how we can define our own aliases. What I want to show you in this video is how we can find useful aliases. So there are lots of blog posts and Reddit posts about different Git aliases, and share your favorite Git aliases, Stack Overflow. and so on. Why don't we take a look at, how about this one right here? So this is a blog post. I'll include these links as resources. And there's a couple on here, like this one right here, LS, that is basically a very pretty formatted way of updating git log. So you could type this yourself. This is just a very fancy way of updating the display for git log. So we can change the color, but we can also reorder things and show the hash first, and then a message, and then an author inside of curly braces, or square brackets rather. These are all things that you can actually tweak too. But if we wanted this one, we just copy it. Take this and put it in our git config. Okay. So let's try it. This is what my regular git log looks like. Here's what one line looks like. I could also do it this way. Okay. And then here is what this new alias looks like. And I'm pretty zoomed in. But if we take a look now, right, we see the commit hash, we see the message, and then we see the committer, I believe is what this is, not the author. Anyway, here's another example. So this one looks pretty useful. Git LL, this will list commits showing changed files. So if I want to know more about, what changed within a given commit and which files were updated, this is going to be kind of a nightmare to look at, I'm sure. But if I do git LL, oh, it's actually not so bad. You can see in one commit I changed README and New.js, or this is the React repo. We can see in other commits quite a few files, lots of files were changed. So that could be very useful as well, right? This is more than just saving us time. This is actually giving us functionality that we probably wouldn't have used otherwise. I'm not going to go and type this. I'm not going to remember it, let alone type it. But this can be very useful now to have this option at our disposal. And there are quite a few others on just this one blog post. For example, this one, depending on your workflow and the company you work for, if they have a specific workflow, this can be nice. This is a command that just renames branches by prepending done to their name. So it's a very long looking command, and this isn't, a lot of work to do without an alias, but it's nice just to have this alias done and be able to just say get done. What you'll see on some of these commands, however, we have not talked about, is an exclamation point. What that means, if it's in a git alias, it actually tells git that this is a shell script. So that gives us access to things that are not git commands, like if you're familiar with grep or echo, or really any commands that we would use in our shell. So we can combine those with git commands, though we do need to then use git. So instead of just branch, git branch or git config and so on. Anyway, this one lists all the aliases that you have set up. So that could be useful if in case you ever forget the different aliases, which, for some of these, if you don't use them all the time, they're still good to have around, right? Even if you don't remember that this is LL, if you are able to just access all your aliases quickly, that's what this will do. So again, this one is in quotes because it's telling git this is going to be a shell script. That's what the exclamation point means. And that gives us access to things like grep, not grip. So if I try this, git LA, list aliases, there's a list of my aliases. And I think that's enough for now. I don't want to waste your time, just as I go through these and sort of pick them out one at a time and show you them. You can set these up on your own. I'll include all of these links. Figure out what works for you. One word of caution, if you are working, this is coming from my personal experience. If you use aliases, and I use them a lot in my personal life, or especially I used to, when I started teaching more, I realized how heavily I actually had relied on aliases, or like my muscle memory was just accustomed to my personal aliases. So if you're working on someone else's computer, a coworker, or in my case, students, I just kept typing things that didn't exist. So a word of mild warning. There's a reason I didn't have everybody set up aliases on day one of this course or lecture one. It would have made the videos shorter, but you need to understand the underlying commands and remember what they are. But aliases can be a nice tool to save you some time. So take a look at some of the links I've included. There's a whole file full of aliases, a very comprehensive file that I'll include. It's from a Git repo called Git Alias, and you can read more about it. It's pretty popular. And it has a README that explains how it works. There's kind of a system for the way that these aliases are set up. It's not just a hodgepodge of useful aliases. They actually follow a particular format that has some rules. Anyway, I'll let you explore that on your own. And that's really it for this section on aliases.